savages and animals don't know anything about their past and don't care. And these kids here have less of a sense of decorum than my Rottweiler had. God bless her gentle soul. And why are you Americans sending your kids to places like that, where they learn to behave worse than wild animals, where they seem to have regressed to some sort of a medieval mob burning witches, where they kick statues for somebody who pulls down a statue of Saddam Hussein and kicks it? I can understand that. He was a tyrant who oppressed them. This wasn't even a real person. It was a generic picture of a Confederate soldier which had been put up in memory of all the young people who had died from that state, fighting for their state. Most of them weren't slave owners. They were just young men who fought because either they thought they were going to protect their families, or they really believed that it was their right to secede from the Union and that the North had no right to order them about. And these kids... Yeah, all right. The idea of a Confederate memorial it does have some really bad connotations, but it's also part of American history. And some of those people were not utter bastards. This wasn't the SS. These were, generally speaking, men fighting for their homes. It's also true that in 1913, it was just about, well, we were only a few years away from the making of that awful film, Birth of a Nation, weren't we? There was a great deal of pushback from white society against the black people, and there's no doubt that in 1913 the situation was worse for blacks than it had been in 1870. But it did get better after that. And it's obvious that that statue might have had some sort of germination in that mentality. But then still, there were people who were alive in 1913 who had been young people in the 1860s. And they would have family members to remember. And these were Americans fighting Americans. They had a lot to remember. And even the ones who weren't alive at the time would have remembered some stories and histories of the family, which included dead sweethearts, unborn babies, half-remembered uncles. There was a lot of tragedy. It wasn't just the soldiers who died. Families died. Women died. They may not be commemorated in the statistics, but they died anyway, because of lack of infrastructure, lack of medicines, and even, you have to admit, rampaging northern soldiers, because not all of them were a model of discretion and good manners. As an aside, what if the South had seceded? The North would have gone ahead. It was an industrialised area by that time. It's not as if the South were a huge and indispensable contributor to the American economy. As a matter of fact, the South was better for the British economy because it was providing Britain with a lot of cheap cotton. And let's face it, the South wasn't so much of an economic powerhouse. Left to themselves, they would have run themselves into a divided and backward society. There would have been very little industrialisation. There usually isn't in a slave society. There'd be a few very rich people, a lot of poor whites, a sort of underclass, and then the slave population, until finally it would just grind to a halt under its own stagnating system. That happens to slave societies all the time. It happened in Greece and Rome, it happened in the Ottoman Empire, and it's happening in California right now, quite frankly, because that's the sort of social division you have even there. Anyway, weak and flabby, it would have finally ended up either being invaded physically or economically by the North and rejoining the Union in any case. But that's an aside. Putting up a statue in 1913 would have been a very natural reaction to all those ageing survivors who wanted to send a message down the future generations about their history. And there's something else I have to ask. Well, it's obvious those kids feel it's important to erase the memory of those who fought, in their opinion, on the wrong side. But, well, if we don't remember who the Union Army was fighting, then how will we remember that they were heroes? You know, the Union Army lost a lot more men than the Confederates did, didn't they? It was like 360,000 to 258,000, something like that. If the Union are not remembered for fighting good soldiers, which the Confederates were, then the Union Army is itself out of history, isn't it? Well, will some future child stand in front of the memorial in Washington to General John Rawlins and say, "Who's that guy in the uniform, Mum?" And Mum will say, "Well, I don't know. Oh, by the way," and once they finish with the statues, it'll be the books, won't it? We'll be writing them out of history altogether. And this woman won't even know what to tell her child. She might say, "I know thousands of Union soldiers died, but I've no idea what they were fighting about." And then maybe she'll say, "Well, maybe they just all shot themselves in the head, because all men in uniform are bad guys anyway, aren't they? I mean, that's what those kids are shouting." Cops, which are the modern soldiers, are hand in hand with the KKK. Mind you, they won't even know what the KKK is. "Who's the KKK, Mum?" this future kid will say. And the mother will say, "Oh, I don't know, they seem like perfectly nice people. I can't find out anything wrong about them. They just like running around in sheets." Look, I was at a demonstration and I was standing right next to Tim Pool when some guy told him about I think it was probably Richard Spencer, saying something dreadful, something racially bad. And, no, Tim Pool said to this guy that Spencer had said something racially bad. And this guy said, no, he never said anything like that. And Tim Pool looked it up. He was busy fiddling about with his smartphone, couldn't find the quote. Because, you see, it had been censored. Because he was accessing this in Europe, and some European algorithm had censored it. So you couldn't find out how terrible Richard Spencer was. So no wonder this guy who was talking to Tim Pool was saying Richard Spencer wasn't so bad after all. This sort of thing, it not only doesn't work, it actually achieves only the opposite of what it purports to want to achieve. But I'll tell you something, looking at those kids in North Carolina University, if I were one of their parents, I'd have them out of there. ASAP, don't stop to pack, just get out of there. And go and get a job where you can learn something about life. Because you're learning nothing in that place. Just destruction and futile, statue-kicking idiocies. I'm very grateful for financial contributions. But if you don't want to give money, you can still help a lot by sharing this and other videos I've made. Also, remember to check your subscription from time to time, as sometimes subscriptions get erased for one reason or another. Till next time.